The lecture today is on Immanuel Kant, the German philosopher, on his book Groundings for the Metaphysics of Morals. Immanuel Kant is a difficult reading, especially when we have no philosophical background. This is why I want you to open the PowerPoint presentation, where the first slide is a graph of philosophy and some of the different trends that we have in philosophy. I want to take you back to IS 203 and remember Plato and Aristotle. You remember when we discussed Plato, we said that probably all the 25 centuries of philosophy are just footnotes to Plato. However, what we would like to discuss today is that in philosophy there are two paths. One is called epistemology, which asks the question, what do we know? How do we know? What are the limits of our knowledge? And the second is ethics. How do we behave? How do we act? What is good? What is bad? In these two trends also, there are two emphases. One is the emphasis on the mind being the predominant tool for acquiring knowledge. And the second is the senses, experience, empirical approach. If we start with Plato and Aristotle, we realize that in Plato's Republic, we read about how he had a theory of forms, that the idea of an object was superior and higher and more perfect than the material object itself. The same way, we found out that for him, especially in the allegory of the caves, all of what we saw in this world were appearances, and the reality was somewhere beyond the senses. So the senses were deceiving. Senses are not a means of acquiring knowledge. Socrates believed that all knowledge is innate, and therefore all we do through our lives through experience is digest back or burp back all this inside innate information. Later we had people like Descartes who said, I think, therefore I am, so the supremacy of knowledge is given to the mind. On the other hand, we had people like Aristotle who said the senses are not bad at all. You remember, he said the causes are important. Yes, the senses are primary knowledge, and without which we could not have secondary and higher rational knowledge. We also had later, with the Enlightenment, people like Bacon, Locke, Hume, who thought of the mind being a tabula rasa, completely white, and only through experience do we gain knowledge. So we had these two paths. One which is supporting the mind, the reason, as being the reception or receptor of knowledge. The other, the senses, as being the mechanism through which we acquire. One is a priori, or prior to experience. The other is posteriori, post to experience. Now, with these two parallel lines never meeting, came Kant, Immanuel Kant, a German philosopher, who in fact he is sometimes referred to as the Copernicus of philosophy, because Copernicus, the astronomer you remember maybe, or you don't know, what he did was revolutionary in the field of astronomy by saying that it is the sun and not the earth which is at the center of the world. In other words, he removed the geocentric view of the universe and replaced it by a sun-centric world. And immediately the whole concept of science and exploration and astronomy changed. So if you go back to Kant, what Kant did in philosophy was a little bit the same. He said, the mind has inbuilt structures without which knowledge cannot be made sense of, and knowledge without these inbuilt structures cannot be grasped or understood or recorded. Let me give you an analogy in modern times of a computer. There is the computer hardware with the programs inside, if you want the software of the programming, but it has zero data. So if you have a very sophisticated computer and you have all the programs and applications that you want, and you don't feed it with any data, you don't get any output. And on the other hand, if you have lots of data, but you don't have the programs, sometimes you click on a file and it says open with what? If you don't have that what, whether it is a PDF file or whether it is an Access database, or you cannot access the data. So what Kant did was he combined both. He said without the structures of the mind, which he described as space and time and categories, and if to understand a bit his categories, he talked about the questions we ask when we have in English grammar or in any grammar adverbs. Where, how much, how many, in which way. All of these are, he thought, as categories in the mind that make sense and classify the knowledge that we receive. So what happens is that when we receive some data from outside, we have these compartments in our mind that classify this knowledge and makes it sensible. So the mind has innate structures and it acquires data. So the two together, this marriage between both, makes it possible for us to have knowledge. Now this was in epistemology, in acquiring knowledge. Now these same two trends were applied also in ethics, in behavior. And I want to take you back to the Greek sophists that were during Socrates' time in Athens. These people came with the idea that man is the measure. So if you ask them, is cheating good? They would say, yes, cheating is good if it makes me get a high grade. But cheating is bad if the teacher catches me and I fail the course. Now, Socrates was very upset with this kind of approach and mentality to behavior. And he said, this cannot be. There should be absolute measures of right and wrong. And therefore, and I want to remind you that when he was imprisoned and Crito, his friend, came and said, let us help you run away, he said, let us analyze if my running away from prison is a proper act. And he raised the question of, do I want every time somebody who is in jail and who gets a chance to get out and escape to do that? If the answer is yes, then I would like this to become a standard. If it is no, then I reject it. Hence, he took things from all sides. And this is a little bit what Kant wanted to do. So Kant, I'm not going to go much into his biography, but I want to tell you that in ethics also, we have two trends. One is deontological, which means the standard is analyzed rationally and logically in itself without moving to the product, without moving to the result. And the other one is teleological, which means if I want to analyze whether an act is good or bad, I analyze the consequences and the results, the motive behind it. So one is a priori, prior to the action, that I analyze whether a thing is right or wrong. And the other is posteriori, based on the result. For these two trends, we have Kant for the first and John Stuart Mill, utilitarianism, for the second. So these will be our two readings. So what we will do is study them one after the other and have a comparison. Now, Kant believes that man, for all ethics, any ethics that we want to deal with, require that first we are free, and second that we are rational. Of course, we will add also that we have a conscience and moral sense and common sense, and also we will add afterwards with Kant the concept of dignity. If I am forced to do an act under duress, I cannot be held responsible for the act. But when I do this out of free will, then I have choices, and if I choose the right thing, then I'm a moral person, I'm a good person. So Kant starts with that there are sometimes, the question that he raises is the question of the imperative. Imperative means I ought to, fi'l amr, I have to. And what is it that makes me do it? It's a sense of duty. Why do I have to keep my promise? Because it is my duty. What is a promise? A promise in the dictionary is defined as an act that is keeping your word. So if you say sometimes you have to keep your promise and sometimes you don't, then the promise is not a promise. The promise is a lie. So it goes rationally against the definition of the whole word and what it means. So Kant goes and says there are hypothetical imperatives and there are categorical imperatives. A hypothetical imperative is an imperative whereby the motives and the results are analyzed. Whereas in a categorical, it is, why do I have to do this? Because it is my duty, question mark. It doesn't anymore analyze whether, if a friend comes and asks for help and asks for money, I don't ask him, why do you need the money for? The friend is a friend. A friend means is somebody who is close to me and I have to help. So I give him the money without any questions. In a teleological or in a utilitarian approach, we will see later, we ask, what is the money going to be used for? Maybe you're going to go and buy a gun and kill somebody. But then that is, for Kant, a secondary approach. His approach is that a categorical imperative is determined by the sense of duty. But if you want to really analyze the act, you have to take two maxims. One is a maxim of nature. Act as if you wish your act to become a universal law. So, in every action that I do, in every act that I perform, I ask. Let me take you an example, give you an example. Suppose you are driving against the traffic because it saves on you 3 hours of traffic jam. You ask the question, do I want this to become a universal law? Do I want everybody who has the chance to drive against the traffic and against one way to do that? If you say yes, then maybe we should, legislate this as a universal law. If you say no, then it means this is not a good universal law. For instance, we ask the question again, we go back. Is cheating good? You will say yes. I want cheating to become a law. But then if you accept cheating as a law, you have to accept that the teacher is going also to cheat while correcting your exam, that the doctor is going to operate on your father probably got his degree cheating, that the captain who's flying your plane on which you're traveling is probably also somebody who cheated and got his license. Would you want to have a universal cheating standard all over the world? If yes, then maybe that is rationally a priori accepted. If no, then your concept of morality here fails to pass the test of the law of nature. That's the first maxim. The second maxim, act in such a way where you treat humanity as an end and not as a means. In every action that we take, priority is given to the human element in it. So if I have, for instance, somebody gives me money to help destroy another human being. So money, matter versus humanity here is the standard. Do I sacrifice a human being for a non-human interest? So these two maxims, act in such a way as you wish your act to become a universal law, or as you wish others to treat you in a way. And second, act in such a way in which the human element has priority over other things. In these two actions, Kant wanted us to establish a system of autonomy of behavior. What does this mean? Kant says, imagine if we take the approach that some people are not religious. Some people are good because God is watching, because there's afterlife, because there's hell, because there's a reward, there's a punishment. But suppose we remove all of that and just take the human existence and say, could human beings be ethically good or bad simply because rationally they are convinced that this is the right thing to do, regardless of religious pressures or other pressures? So he comes with this concept of a kingdom of end. What does he mean by that? He says, in every state you have three parts. You have the legislative, the one who makes the laws. You have the executive, the one who executes the laws. And you have the judiciary, which is the one who punishes you and rewards you for the actions you've done. So, if every one of us becomes this trinity, these three together, if I legislate the laws as a Nietzschean noble man of the higher values, so if I approach my standards as being like we do on New Year's Day with New Year's resolutions, which we break in 24 hours. But suppose I come with this approach that it's going to be these are the laws I want to, these are my standards, I legislate them. The next thing is I execute them. And the third thing is if I don't, then I penalize myself. I put on myself punishments or rewards. So in this way, every human being becomes an autonomous kingdom of morality. And if everyone does that, we have a perfect society. Of course, it's very ideal. But he was trying to show us that human beings, by applying this internal system of regulation and control, can ethically opt for a good system of kingdom of ends. So everyone, the ends would be not as a Machiavellian end, but an end of morality. Now, and finally, he concluded his remarks by saying, everything has a price except dignity. When a person compromises his dignity or her dignity, then it becomes a commodity, and therefore the question of morality disappears. So in order to have a moral standard or a moral kingdom of ends, we need freedom, we need rationality, we need common sense, and we need to keep our dignity. And it is these principles that have motivated the architects of the Bill of Human Rights in 1948 to draft the 30 Articles of Human Rights. Articles that have tried to address, the first article of the human rights says, all human beings are born equal and free in dignity and rights. And Kant was one of the first who started this approach in terms of morality. So, in short, what is the contribution of Kant? Kant brought us this possibility of putting the mind and the actions together. He wants us to be motivated by a sense of duty and not a sense of interest, and to test whether an act is right or wrong or morally viable or not. He has these two maxims: act in such a way where you wish your act to become a universal law, and act in such a way where you treat humanity as an end and not as a means. Now, we will go through the 4 examples which he uses in this text that we are reading, and I have put the PDF link for you on the classroom management. 4 examples. The first example is of a person who wishes to commit suicide, but just before he does that, he asks the question, is this morally right or wrong? The second is a person who has borrowed money from a friend and has promised to pay back, knowing that he will never pay back because he doesn't have the money. So is this moral? Do we want people to make promises under false pretenses? The third one is a person has a certain talent, but he doesn't wish to use this talent because it is a lot of encumbersome for him. For instance, today, imagine a doctor who has found the cure for the coronavirus, but because it is going to make him exposed to the public and go to work extra, and so he would retain this talent and not share it with others. And the fourth is a person who can interfere and stop an evil act from happening, but doesn't do because he doesn't want to. Again, for example, you are a neighbor who sees every night the husband or the wife beating each other, and you don't interfere. And then when something happens, you say, I could have stopped it. I would like to remind you here, we are guilty sometimes, not only by action, but by omission. Sometimes you all complain that, look at these people in parliament, thank God I didn't vote for them, so I'm not guilty. But yes, you are guilty if you had voted for other people and did not refrain from doing your civic duty. So sometimes it's not only action, but also omission that takes us to guilt or good action. So here I would like to take these 4 examples, and we are going to analyze them by applying on them the 2 maxims. Do I want suicide to become a universal law? And in dealing with, do I treat my humanity as an end or as a means? Do I want everybody to make a promise and not keep it? If that is the norm, then a promise is no more a promise is a lie. Do I want to have people who have special talents who will not develop them and bring them to the maximum? Do I want human beings to remain aloof and antisocial? Of course, we want all to be social distancing now. But also we have to have the human approach, the philanthropic approach of reaching out to others. So these examples will be analyzed. And next week, when we do John Stuart Mill, we'll take these same examples and apply them in a teleological or utilitarian or a posteriori method of evaluation. So this is the discussion of Immanuel Kant on the groundings on the metaphysics of morals. Thank you.